I met my dad for the first time when I was 4, and he was behind bars. Is Daddy very wealthy? I asked. My mom told me to keep quiet and stay close to her. Men in uniform drilled her with questions, while other guards rummaged through the gifts that we had brought for my dad. Although this first meeting happened almost 3 decades ago, I can so clearly remember it. That was the day I realized that my dad was a prisoner being kept by these guards. And those gifts that we brought for him? They were essential food and medicine, which he needed to stay alive behind these foreboding concrete walls. My father was first sent to prison for leading a peaceful protest against the Burmese military dictatorship in 1988. He was among thousands of students who marched on the street calling for democracy, human rights and freedom in my country. Since then, he has been in and out of prison for continuing to protest military rule and advocating for human rights.
The more I learned, the more certain I was that I needed to follow in my father's footsteps. Though my father urged me to choose a different path, I refused to heed his warnings. But what I had not fully anticipated was the consequence I would face from the Burmese government. Having used my voice abroad, I could no longer return home without facing the possibility of arrest. I subsequently became a political dissident in exile. In 2008, caving to a combination of internal and external pressures, the Burmese military regime drafted a new constitution, which, while safeguarding much of their power, offered limited democratic and social reforms. 2 years later, they released Aung San Suu Kyi, an opposition leader who had spent nearly 15 years in detention, and allowed her to stand for elections in April 2012. Despite warnings from human rights activists like me that the reform process in Burma was designed to keep the military in power, the international community largely ignored our concerns. Meanwhile, many activists in Burma who spoke out against the military and demanded genuine democracy were arrested and thrown in prison. In late 2016, when the military began perpetrating what the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights referred to as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing against the Rohingya, a Muslim minority, it seemed like things might be reaching a breaking point. Finally, we thought, the international community would wake up to the atrocities being committed in Burma and come to our aid. Except this aid largely took the form of sanctioning a few Burmese military generals, freezing their assets and banning them from traveling to the US. It's no wonder Min Aung Hlaing, the head of the Burmese military, calculated that he could get away with staging a coup in February. The same day the coup began and Suu Kyi was arrested on trumped-up charges, the military came for my father, who had most recently been released from prison in 2012. As a prominent democracy advocate, the military undoubtedly considered my father a troublemaker, and they arrested him before he could mobilize any anti-coup movement. Activists inside and outside the country have been calling for a global arms embargo to stop the flow of weapons to the military, additional sanctions on gas revenues that help fund the Burmese military, and support for efforts to report the military's violent actions to the International Criminal Court. Though I do not know when my father will be released from prison this time, or when I will be able to go home safely, I will continue to speak out against the military and amplify the voices of people in Burma who have been oppressed by the brutal military regime. Yes, the Burmese military denies this oppression and says it's part of its fight against terrorism, but the truth is that we are being persecuted. Despite the ongoing use of violence, I refuse to believe the Burmese military has won. People like my father and many others like him continue to risk our lives for the sake of freedom. And with the aid of the US and the rest of the free world, we might just have a chance to help the people of Burma achieve true democracy.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe